Episode 1: The first meeting in the alley of Sinchon. The night streets of Sinchon were, as always, full of people. The signboard lights shone as if they were competing with each other about who was brighter, and every small alley was lined with pubs and taverns. The smell of pork belly fat burning, the smell of pancakes sizzling, and the smell of spicy oil dripping from tofu kimchi filled the air. The laughter of passers-by, the songs sung by young students coming out of karaoke, and the sound of a busking guitar bursting out from somewhere, all mixed together. Sinchon was, as usual, filled with the sound of youth. That evening, inside a small tavern deep in that alley, there was one room full of unusual tension. It was the 5-to-5 blind date between Y University and K University students. Some of them surely hoped to meet a lifelong partner here, and some were more interested in the free drinks and side dishes. But everyone commonly felt one thing, a pounding heart that whispered, this gathering might make today a little more special than an ordinary day. Inside the room, at first, it was awkward. The hands holding glasses trembled for no reason, and one person grabbed the food that the waiter brought too hastily and thought, "Ah, did I look too greedy?" Feeling embarrassed. Especially the self-introduction time, it was filled with tension, like the moment of writing answers on an exam paper. Name, age, major, hobby. The words were short, but the tone and the facial expression were long descriptions. One said, "I like reading, but actually hid the habit of staying up all night with romance web novels." Another said, "I like exercising, but in reality had a gym membership card in the drawer unused for 3 months." At that time, there was one person who especially drew eyes. It was Kang-soe. He was tall and well-built, but more than that, it was his expression that came into view first. It was not a big and bold laugh, but whenever someone spoke, he nodded and listened carefully, and that attitude spread a warm atmosphere around him. Kang-soe was taciturn, but his taciturnity was not simply the absence of words. It looked more like a signal saying, "I am listening to your story." And where his gaze stayed, there was Aema. Aema was a young woman with long eyelashes and clear eyes. She did not speak much, but in one expression, one smile, there were many stories contained. She held the glass with both of her small hands, sometimes bowed her head shyly, but the occasional glance she raised held both courage and curiosity. The host of the blind date tried to break the awkwardness. "Well then, shall we have a toast? May we all meet good connections." The sound of glasses clinking rang out clear. At that moment, Kang-soe and Aema's eyes once again caught each other. It was only a short moment, but in each other's eyes, they seemed to read the message. "You too, you're feeling this air right now." The drinking table slowly heated up. Someone made a joke loudly, someone else laughed and coughed while looking for water, and someone else cast glances trying to get attention. But those glances just wandered in the air. But Kang-soe and Aema were different. The two did not exchange many words, but instead did not miss each other's smallest reactions. When Aema hesitated with her soju glass, Kang-soe quietly pushed the side dish plate forward. When Kang-soe gave an awkward smile at someone else's joke, Aema followed with a soft smile. Time passed, and at last came the words, "Now choose your partner." At that moment, everyone's breath was stifled. Someone pretended to check their phone, avoiding eyes, and someone whispered while glancing at a friend. But Kang-soe and Aema were different. They already knew. Their eyes did not allow any other choice. The two almost at the same time rose from their seats. The moment they stepped out of the room, the air changed. Instead of the smell of oil inside the tavern, the chilly air of the alley brushed their noses. Instead of the heat of glasses, the cool autumn night air cooled their cheeks. The alley of Sinchon was always noisy, but that night, only for these two, it looked especially quiet. There was the noise of the street, but it did not enter their ears. Only the sound of footsteps coming closer to each other reached them. Aema stopped for a moment and looked at the lights reflected on the window. Kang-soe followed her gaze and looked at the same place. There were no words, but in that silence, the two were already exchanging many stories, as if meeting someone you had long waited for, or as if fate disguised as coincidence had planned this night in advance. Their first meeting began like that, in the small alley of Sinchon. Episode 2 At the cafe window, the metaphor. After leaving the alley of Sinchon, the two stopped their steps for a moment. The cool wind brushed their cheeks, but in their hearts, an unknown warmth was rising. Aema looked around for a while and then carefully spoke. Over there, that cafe, how about it? The window seats look nice. Kang-soe nodded his head. The two passed through the street, where neon signs were flashing, and entered the cafe that lit a cozy light. A warm coffee scent lingered gently in the air. The window seat was empty, as if left for them. The light that entered through the curtain wrapped their faces softly. When choosing the menu, Aema hesitated a little and ordered a latte. And Kang-soe ordered black coffee. Soon the cups were placed, and the steam rising above blurred the space between the two faintly, like a fog, and like a curtain covering the excitement in their hearts. At first, only small conversations came and went. Stories about school, about classes, short jokes about club activities. But soon, the conversation flowed more personally. Aema slowly stirred her coffee and asked, Kang-soe, I heard that among university men you are the strongest, right? In that tone, there was both mischief and curiosity. Kang-soe widened his eyes as if surprised. Me well, when I was young. I ate snakes in the mountain, I ate deer antlers, I ate bear gallbladder, I ate wild ginseng. I ate bakbunja, so, yes, I became a bit strong. At those words, Aema's eyes widened round. Her lips opened slightly and she murmured, "Ah, I see." Then lowering her head again, as if revealing a big secret, she whispered quietly, "But I heard, even there you are strong, aren't you?" At that moment, hotter than the steam rising from the coffee cup, a heat swirled between the two. Kang-soe's face turned red. He looked out the window pretending, coughing awkwardly. That actually, it has too much heat. Sometimes it gets too hot, so I press it against my stomach and wrap a cold band around my waist. Hearing those words, Aema burst out the laughter she was holding back. But the laughter was not only mischief. In that laughter, there was also shyness and curiosity. Like the small foam sitting on the coffee cup, in her heart also, a throbbing was forming. For a while, no words were spoken. But the silence was never awkward. Outside the window, neon signs flashed, and the sound of people walking the street flowed in. All that noise became background music, and only the gaze of the two shone like on a stage. Kang-soe, embarrassed, fiddled with the handle of the mug with his fingertip. And Aema quietly looked at him. Her gaze was deeper than when they first met. If at first it was only curiosity, now it was a gaze mixed with trust and expectation. Kang-soe, Aema quietly called. He raised his head and looked at her. Aema hesitated for a while, then smiled again. Today I think I came out well. I thought such gatherings would always be awkward and boring. Kang-soe smiled and replied, I also think so. Actually, this is my first time in such a meeting. I was nervous, but being with you, Aema, makes me feel comfortable. At those words, Aema's cheeks were dyed red. She brushed her hair behind her ear and looked out the window. Pretending, but surely, a smile was on her face. At the next table, another couple was still struggling in awkward conversation. I like poetry collections. You mean you want to go to marriage, right? Hearing that clumsy conversation, Aya and Kang-soe burst into laughter. At the same time, that laughter relieved the tension and brought their hearts a little closer. Time in the cafe flowed slowly. The coffee cups were already half empty, and the lights outside the window grew deeper. But the conversation between the two grew brighter. At first, it was jokes. But now it was a step of showing each other's inner hearts. The words they shared that day at the cafe window were not simply an extension of a blind date. It was the process of planting a small seed in each other's hearts. Whether someday that seed would grow and bloom, flowers, or scatter away in the wind, no one could know. But one thing was certain. The metaphors and laughter of that day left a deep impression in the hearts of both. Episode 3. Shall we go rest? The second hand of the cafe clock was quietly flowing. The coffee in the cups had already decreased more than half, and the neon lights outside the window were shining in darker colors. On the small coaster placed on the table, Aya was slowly spinning it with her fingertips. The round circle, turning round and round, resembled the hesitation that was circling inside her heart. Kang-soe raised the coffee cup and slowly took a sip. The bitterness went down his throat and somehow, in his chest, a strange heat spread. Whenever Aema's eyes met his, he felt an odd pressure, as if he had to make some decision. But at the same time, in those eyes, he also felt a strange attraction and a comfort. A short silence passed. Aya was still spinning the coaster, and Kang-soe, watching her, coughed awkwardly. At that time, Aya raised her head. Her lips opened slowly, and a small voice came out. Kang-soe, I feel a little dizzy. Shall we go rest? At that moment, Kang-soe's hand stopped. The fingers holding the coffee cup gripped tightly, and he chewed the meaning of her words. To rest. It could simply mean resting because she was tired. But it could also mean something else. Kang-soe tried to hide his fluster and forced a smile. Then, shall we go to the Han River to get some fresh air? But Aya shook her head slightly and sent a mischievous look. The corner of her lips rose slightly, and again a low voice flowed. Not there. You know there. Kang-soe's eyes widened. In an instant, countless places passed through his head. The library, the theater, the park. But her tone clearly told him it was not such ordinary places. Cautiously, Kang-soe looked outside the window. Not far away, a red signboard was shining brightly. Perhaps, are you talking about that V hotel? Aya nodded, with a bright smile. Yes. Kang-soe, your eyes are really good. Let's go rest there a while. At that moment, Kang-soe's chest began to pound loudly. Like an old drum suddenly struck again. The suppressed tension burst all at once. He didn't know what to do, coughed awkwardly. But his steps were already heading to the cafe door. When they came out to Sinchon Street, the night air blew colder. But their steps did not hesitate. Rather, that cold air seemed to cool down the burning inside. While walking the street, they did not share many words. Instead, the sound of each other's footsteps brushing side by side was the only conversation. Sometimes, when shoulders and arms slightly touched, a small shiver was born. And that shiver shook the heart more strongly than words. The people on the street were still laughing noisily. Some sang drunken songs, and some walked while looking at phones indifferently. But in the ears of the two, such noise hardly reached. As if only the two remained in the world. The surroundings turned into a blurred background. The traffic light turned on. Finally, the green light in front of them shone, and Kang-soe murmured inside. This must be a signal. The signal was not simply telling them to cross the street. But it felt like permission that their hearts could go in the same direction. Aya smiled faintly and said, Today, it feels like the green light keeps following us. Kang-soe nodded and answered, Yes, it is like waving us to go forward. Their footsteps were getting closer to the hotel sign. As the red light grew clearer, Kang-soe's heart beat faster. Aya looked at his side face and smiled again softly. That smile contained a meaning that no need to speak. In the night air, their shadows stretched long together. And those shadows were getting closer, as if trying to become one. Episode 4: The Silence of the Elevator. The light of the V Hotel sign cast a larger and larger shadow. When seen from far away, it was just a simple light. But the closer they approached, the more that light carried a strange weight. The two, after walking silently for a while, finally stood before the lobby. The glass door opened automatically, and air of another world flowed out. Unlike the noisy street, the inside of the lobby was calm and neat. On the sofa, someone was sitting reading a magazine. Another couple was waiting to check in. A middle-aged man with a briefcase walked quickly, each with their own circumstances and stories entangled. But at that moment, in the world of Kang-soe and Aya, it seemed that only the two of them existed. In front of the counter, Kang-soe hesitated. It was a moment he had to bring out courage. But at the same time, it was a burden given by a strange place. At that moment, Aya smiled gently and nodded. That smile was a stronger signal than words. "It's okay, let's go in together." The procedure was not long. A short conversation, a sheet of paper, and a small key card. But during that short time, Kang-soe's heart was pounding dozens of times more. Aya was placing her eyes here and there around the lobby. But through the corner of her eye she was watching his tense fingertips. Those fingertips were clumsy, but at the same time sincere. The two walked side by side toward the elevator. The light flickered, and the door opened. It looked like a door leading to another world. When they stepped inside, the cold metal wall reflected them like a mirror. In the mirror, the two were a little different than outside. Aya looked more composed, and Kang-soe somehow looked more nervous. But that nervousness was not necessarily bad. It was the nervousness of one departing on an unfamiliar trip. The nervousness of turning the first page of a new book. When he pressed the button, a small light came on. With the sound ding, the elevator began to rise slowly. A stillness spread. But the stillness was not uncomfortable silence. It was a background that made each other's breathing more clear. Kang-soe looked at his own face reflected in the mirror. His face was red, and his eyes were shaking. But at the same time, in those eyes, expectation and resolution were mixed. Aya, through the mirror, felt that gaze, and turned her head slightly to look at him. When their eyes met beyond the mirror, the air in the elevator became even heavier. In the short quiet, Kang-soe raised his hand and brushed back his hair. Aya observed that small movement. Whether that gesture was to hide nervousness or to show courage, she could not distinguish. But surely, even that one gesture shook her heart. The elevator slowly changed the numbers of floors. From the first to the second, the third, the fourth. Each time the number changed, the hearts of the two also seemed to rise higher. As if those numbers were not just floor numbers, but the shortening of the distance toward each other. At last, they arrived at the destination. With the sound ding, the door opened. But the two remained standing still for a while. Because more than the fact that the door opened, the meaning of stepping over that threshold was felt greater. Aya was the first to take a small step. The sound of her shoes talk echoed through the hallway. Kang-soe, after taking a breath, followed her. That one step was not simply a step. It was like a promise not to postpone today to tomorrow. The elevator door closed again, and the stillness inside was pushed outside. Now what remained was only the quiet air of the hallway, and the sound of the two's footsteps side by side. Those footsteps were a promise moving closer to each other. And the long silence of that hallway was like a preview for the story to unfold. Episode 5: Let's Go Rest Again. The night was already deep. The moonlight hanging outside the window touched the hotel glass faintly scattered. After not a short time had passed, The two again took the elevator down to the lobby. When the elevator door opened, the lobby lights warmly welcomed them. The air, which at first was unfamiliar, now felt as if it had become familiar. The atmosphere of the lobby was different from before. The tension they had felt when first entering had faded. And instead, a strange comfort was filling in. Kang-soe carefully opened the refrigerator at the side of the lobby and took out a drink. The cold feeling of the bottle cooled his hot fingertips. He handed it to Aema and spoke. "Aema, drink some water. It will calm you down a little." Aema received the bottle and nodded. But her hand was slightly trembling. Even the legs that had been supporting her seemed to lose strength and shook lightly. Finally, Kang-soe stretched out his arm and supported her. At that moment, Aema slowly leaned her body on him. For a while she could not speak, then at last, with a drowsy expression, she whispered, "I would like to go rest again." That voice was low, but to Kang-soe's ears it sounded like thunder. At once his shoulders straightened by themselves. And in his chest, a tight and swelling feeling arose. It was a sentence he could never forget for his life. In that one sentence, many meanings were contained. It could have been a joke, and it could have been sincerity. Or somewhere in between, like a secret joke that only the two could share. Kang-soe tried hard to look calm and laughed. "Aema, are you really okay? Today has been a rather long day." Aema nodded and whispered again. "It's okay. Rather I like that more." The air flowing between the two was slower than the lobby's music. Though the piano melody was flowing softly, the beating of their hearts easily overtook that music. When they came out again, the streets of Sinchon had not yet lost their liveliness. In front of the pubs, there were still groups laughing and chatting. And at the street corner, a young man strummed his guitar and sang. But for the two, it was as if they were in another world, quiet and apart. On the road where neon signs flashed, Kang-soe gently held Aema's hand. At first, it was just the back of the hand touching. But soon their fingers intertwined and their palms were firmly joined. At that moment, their steps naturally found the same rhythm. The wind of Sinchon was somewhat chilly. But that chill instead soothed the hot feelings inside. The laughter of passers-by flowed like background music. And the two needed no words. Just the act of walking together already spoke many stories. Aema lifted her head and looked up at the sky. Today, it is truly a strange day. Laughing like this, being excited like this, expecting like this. It has been such a long time. Kang-soe smiled and replied, "I feel the same. I never imagined today would become so special." Their shadows stretched long under the streetlights. Like two shadows were becoming one line, they grew closer. That night, the streets of Sinchon were still noisy. But in the hearts of Kang-soe and Aema, there was only each other. And their hearts were facing the same direction. Even when that night ended, the steps of the two did not stop. The path where they held each other's hands and walked. That was only one scene of a story just beginning. Episode 6: The Rumor of Sinchon and the next chapter. The next morning, the streets of Sinchon were once again bustling. The students who had lifted glasses until last night were still soaked in hangovers. And those hurrying to morning lectures stepped busily. The cart vendor uncle, as always, lifted the ladle of soup preparing his business. And in front of the convenience store, young people with coffee cans rubbed their eyes and gathered in small groups. And among them, inevitably, a rumor was spreading. "Hey, you know there was a blind date yesterday? They say the best couple came out of it." "Yes, I heard too." "What were their names?" "Ah, right. Kang-soe and Aema." Rumors always spread faster than truth. And they always decorate things more colorfully than facts. Some said the two, at the first moment of meeting, immediately held hands and went out. Some exaggerated that in the hotel lobby, Aema's legs gave way and Kang-soe lifted her up. Others said the two walked together through Sinchon Street, laughing like longtime lovers. Whether the reality was so or not, it did not matter to people. What mattered was not the truth, but the sweetness, the envy, and the joking stories they could imagine inside the tale. Kang-soe and Aema, hearing such rumors, quietly smiled. It already spreads like this, Aema said. Kang-soe awkwardly scratched his head. Well, that is what rumors are. Half is truth, and half is made-up stories. But the two knew that the time of yesterday was not simply a made-up story, but a clear truth. Though to others it might look like a one-night happening, to them, it was a memory that would remain long in their hearts. A few days later, meeting again in the alley of Sinchon. They still awkwardly laughed and greeted each other. But this time, it was not a blind date gathering. They already knew each other's names. And they already remembered walking the street together. The metaphors they shared at the cafe window. The whisper like a joke, "Shall we go rest?" And the small laughter flowing in the lobby. All those made the distance between the two no longer far. Now, the time being together was natural. And the story of yesterday was ready to soak into the daily life of today. The streets of Sinchon were still busy. But among the people, the footsteps of Kang-soe and Aema continued side by side clearly. Their shadows stretched long under the streetlight. And as if two shadows were becoming one, they grew closer and closer. After that day, people sometimes, seeing them, said, "Ah, those two are the very protagonists of that rumor." And even added with a laugh, "But don't you think they look much better together than the rumor says?" The story closes here for now. But it is not the end. It is not the last page of the book. But only the last page that makes you wait for the next volume. The footsteps of the two were like a long novel just beginning. And that novel would probably continue like this. After that night, the two learned a little different way of resting. And that way of resting was a special method, possible only when they were together.